Cool. I'm going to bring up our first lightning talk. It is Jordan Bryon, and he's going to tell us about an open source project that he's been working on to help you manage your JavaScript dependencies. Help me give him a warm welcome.
Made a critical error and brought my beer up. Thank you.
Yep.
You're also going to have to give me a hand or a little bit of a patience because I've never used Google Sheets before, and we're using Google Sheets tonight. So as soon as I can find my mouse, we're going to do it. All right, here we go. So this is only tangentially related to Ember, but I think it's something that we can all we've all had to deal with. So automated dependency updates, that's my name, Jordan Bryon, and that's me on Twitter. I don't tweet that much, so don't bother. Yarn upgrade, we've all been here, we've all run this, we've all probably seen the output for your yarn lock and said, good Lord, what have I done? So my project, oh wait, hold on, that's a relevant GIF because you're thinking, good Lord, what have I done? There we go. So why upgrade? First of all, we should talk about this. I know external dependencies are a hot topic these days. Should you have them? Should you be very picky about what you add? But why proactively upgrade? Well, security patches, right? That's pretty easy. You want to make sure you don't have any vulnerabilities. Bug fixes from your libraries, that's obvious too. And ultimately for me, it's fighting bit rot. If you ignore your yarn lock for a long time, you're going to get some serious bit rot. And then when you go to do your Ember upgrade, you're going to be fighting something pretty serious, an uphill battle. There are a lot of services and or, whatever libraries.io is, that will help you with this. The only problem is some of them will charge you money for your private repositories, which I'm guessing most of you probably work on in your day-to-day life. So I wrote this thing called GemDandy, automated gem file updates. Now I realize this is Ember and we talked about JavaScript, but so I made it do Yarn too. So we're going to talk a little bit about that part. It's Yarn Dandy. So if you're on GitHub, this is actually what it does. It gives you a pull request. You can schedule how often you want it. It'll tell you all the packages that have been updated. As you can see, Babel had a good time this day. It'll link you to their GitHub project. It'll link you to their Git diff between 7.16 and 7.20. And if I can find it, it'll give you their change log as well, so you can actually see what changed, which is pretty handy. The interface is pretty simple. If your project is on GitHub, you just run bin yarn dandy, your project, GitHub, organization and project. And then under the hood, what's happening? Well, your target repo is being cloned. Yarn upgrade command is run. We diff the new and old yarn files to figure out what changed. The changes are committed if they're relevant. And a pull request is open on GitHub. Pretty nice, right? One pull request. So you're all excited, take my money. Don't worry, it's free and open source software, which I think is pretty important. That's the URL. I'll tweet it at some point, so I'll hashtag Ember.js NYC. I don't know, something like that, so you can find it. One big caveat to all of this, it is pretty much hacked together. So it started as gem file updates, and I tagged on the yarn. We've been using it since September, though, and I got to say it's kind of bulletproof. It's been working really well. So go check it out. The bonus is, so it's automated, right? So if you set up a free Heroku dyno, all you have to do is run this rake command that I've already written for you, and every day or every 10 minutes or however you want to set up Heroku to run, you get those updates. So that's pretty sweet. So GemDandy, go check it out and get your yarn file updated. Thanks, guys.
Any questions for Jordan?
Yeah.
So, can we do partial updates?
No. You can use, Yarn has that, you can lock a certain version, right? I can't remember exactly what the API is. So if there's something you don't want to move past it, you can use whatever that Yarn nomenclature is to say, please don't update this past a certain point. Also, to be clear, this is not a full Yarn upgrade latest. This is just Yarn upgrade, so it'll respect whatever you have in package.json. And it's open source, so you can make it do whatever you want. And it's free.
Any other questions? Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jordan.
Thank you.
All right. I recruited our next speaker about 10 minutes ago.
That's true.
So if he doesn't have his shit together, you can blame me. I asked him to talk about Tract Decorator with the RFC opened yesterday, I think. It's great reading if you haven't read it already. But if you'd like a gentle introduction, please help me welcome to the front of the room our friend Tom Dale. Yep.
Oh, hold on, I got the LinkedIn can't afford the new MacBook Pro, so I got the old one. No USB-C for me.
Is that all right in there?
You know, the feng shui is a little off, but it's like fine.
There you go. Give you a few more inches right there. All right.
Beautiful. Okay. Hey everybody.
Hi.
How's it going? It's good? Right on. Okay, Luke asked me to project. Wait, I don't need to project my voice anymore because you have the iPhone. Here, I'll make sure you don't lose it. Hey everyone. Okay, so in the history of spicy RFCs, this RFC is definitely going to be the spiciest. This is, the object model in Ember, what we call the object model, which is like, Ember object plus all of the APIs that go along with it for change tracking, computed properties, observers, having to call, this.set to mutate properties, right? We've seen quite a few evolutionary improvements to that system over the years. This actually comes to us from Sprout Core via Cocoa. So a lot of the ideas and the API and all this stuff that as an Ember today in 2018 actually originates from Cocoa, which is like from Next Step in the 80s, right? So we have this like really cool lineage. But like everything, when we were designing that system, we had to be really careful because even though we were really excited about using hot new technologies such as ES5, at the time, ES3 was really all we had available to us. So we had to make a lot of design decisions to support the most important browser, IE7. And what's been really exciting, I think, is that in that time, when we started, JavaScript was a very static language. The standards bodies had kind of stagnated, browsers had kind of stagnated, the browser wars were over, IE had won. And since then, there's been this really, I think, amazing rejuvenation and renaissance of the web and web standards, most notably, perhaps, TC39. TC39, as you can probably tell, is Technical Committee 39, which you can probably tell is the committee that designs the specification for JavaScript, the language. So that standards body is responsible for evolving and kind of being the steward of JavaScript. I think the thing that was really exciting is that when we got started, that committee was just like computer science PhD programming language wonks and browser vendors. And there was a really important voice missing in the room, which is the voice of people like you, practitioners, people who use this technology and actually build big apps at scale. Stick around for Chris's talk about big apps at scale. And as part of that, at Ember as a project, we recognized right away that in order to have the impact that we wanted to have, we couldn't just be off in our own little silo of the world. We had to get involved in that process. And actually, Yehuda was the one who kind of like broke down those barriers in the first place. It's probably most people don't know this or remember this, but Yehuda Katz and Paul Irish were the ones who broke down the wall, basically stormed the castle of TC39 and kind of got in via jQuery. The jQuery Foundation and the jQuery standards team, they were the first ones, and they kind of just, once they were in, they sent the elevator back down, and now you go to a TC39 meeting, and it's largely practitioners. It's fantastic, Anyway, all that is to say, we've been working for the past many years on saying, what do we need to do? What do we need to add to JavaScript as a language to take some of the stuff that we find really productive and beneficial to Ember users? How do we bring that to a language in a way that we can start interoping with other libraries and the rest of the ecosystem? Because no one here, I think, thinks that we're the ones that have any kind of monopoly on good ideas, right? So many great ideas are generated every day on Hacker News, this is like a 20, 30-minute lightning talk, right, Luke? Anyway, okay, I'll shut up. All right, anyway, you should read the RFC. I'm just going to give you a high-level preview. So this is the first time, I think, that we've really fundamentally rethought the way that we do change tracking, state management in Ember. Now, the prototype the RFC and the design of track properties comes from a prototype that we did in Glimmer.js, where we said we don't have the full Ember object model available. We want something super modern, super small, compact, simple, and really fast. And that actually worked really well in Glimmer, but I think we actually have a little bit higher standard for Ember as well, which is it can't just be small, simple, and fast. It also has to be productive and ergonomic, and it has to be something that we would feel comfortable taking to our team members who are maybe less experienced or building at really large scale and have them be productive with it. So track properties, it uses a new feature in JavaScript that you know what, it's not important. Anyway, decorators are in JavaScript, and they're really great, and they're very similar to the functionality that you're used to using with things like computed properties. Anyway, we get this really nice syntax baked in. So this is a decorator. This is @tracked. So let me start off like this.
Is there like a night mode you can turn off?
No, it's the yin and the yang. Look, it's like the light solarized and the dark solarized. What do you want from me? Is that better? Can you make it bigger? Okay, all right. Yeah, well, how about people in the back? No? Hope your eye prescription's good. Okay. Yeah, track. Okay, so tracked is a decorator, and what this is saying, when we say tracked count equals 1, this tells Ember this property could change, so watch it. In other words, you need to opt in and explicitly, like when you're reading this component, you can say explicitly, I know exactly what's going to change in this component, because anything that could change is going to have this tracked decorator next to it. And okay, so now if we write an action, okay, so I'm going to write this action called increment, and then we're going to bind this function to the onClick event of this button, and now in our action we're going to say this.count plus plus. Now already your mind is blown as an Ember developer. You're like, what? I don't type this.set. I don't need to type this.set, this.count plus 1. No, you can use all of the native functionality and the really advanced things like the increment operator that are brand new in JavaScript. Okay, so if we click this, boom. Okay, so you can see that as I click it, it's updating automatically. And I think like this code is very terse. It's very simple. And I think it's very expressive. When you look at it, you understand what it's doing. Now, I think you're probably thinking like, seems cool, but probably not worth reading this really spicy RFC just to get rid of this.set. Or maybe it is, I don't know. You're probably thinking, well, what about computed properties, which is like the bread and butter, the backbone, pardon the pun, of any good Ember app. Boo! Oh, get out of here. Oh, God. Everyone here is like 20 and doesn't know any of these jokes. All right. You're probably thinking, what about computed properties? Okay, so I'll make this really quick because I've definitely overstayed my welcome. With computed properties, you're probably used to having to do stuff like, you'll do stuff like this. Let me type some garbage here. You're like, okay, full name, and then you're like computed, and you have to type the dependencies. You're like, okay, this depends on first name, this depends on last name, and then you write your function and everything's good. But that's the really simple case. Probably many of you are like, that's actually like, okay, it's like person dot like address or home address. And it's like, okay, now I have to do like at each, right? And the problem is that someone who just graduated from a boot camp and is used to writing really modern JavaScript takes one look at this and they're like, fuck no, what is this? Get me out of here. And that's not good, right? Especially because you are expressing yourself twice. You first have to write all these dependencies out. You have to learn what this is. Is it JavaScript? Is it Scala? I don't know. It's nothing, right? It's like this little at each. Like what is that? We don't know. And you just have to memorize this little micro DSL to tell Ember like this is the crap I'm about to use right here. It's like you just said it, right? Like you just said it. You don't need to say it again. So with tracked properties, we have this feature that I think is super cool. And to me, this is like the killer feature of tracked properties. We can get rid of all of that, the duplicating the dependencies, the how you learn this micro DSL for that. All you have to do is write the function like you would normally write the function anyway. And tracked properties are smart enough to see what you're using inside that function and build up that list of dependencies for you. Okay, so instead of... I got promoted, so I don't write code anymore. So instead of risking not writing the code correctly, I've pre-prepared an example. Okay, so in this example, I have a property that I'm displaying called full name, and then I have an input element, and I'm binding the onMouse event to this action called setFirstName. So then if we look at the component implementation, you'll see I've got first name and last name. Now note that these are both tracked. And now I'm using tracked with this syntax for a getter, right? This is basically the native JavaScript syntax for how you'd write a computed property just in a JavaScript class. And then here's my action. It takes this is a lie. This is event. And okay, so now if I type, oh God, I just broke it. Oh God, I broke it again. Oh God. Oh God, I broke it. Oh, no, it worked. Why did that work? Wait, why?
I think, is it using the global, event global by accident?
Oh yeah, you're right. Okay, so this should be event. Okay. So this is like a real time. You'll win a prize if you can help debug my code in real time. What? What?
You did mouse up in it, right?
Yeah, so weird. Anyway, whatever. Anyway, the point is, you can see that as I type, it's eventually a consistent system. It's a distributed system. So what's cool about this is I didn't have to express these dependencies. It knew that even though I was showing full name, when I was making a mutation to this first name property, that was enough to know it was going to update. Now, the next thing I would do is do a demo where I remove the tracked and it stops updating, but based on my shitty code, the odds of that happening anyway are true. So anyway, that's just a small taste. There's a lot more to it. But the takeaway is, I hope you'll agree that forgetting about what the performance is and what the memory consumption is, it's awesome. The most important thing is that it's super ergonomic. It's super understandable, and I think it compares very, very favorably to anything else that you could use to build web applications today. So thank you guys very much.
A couple of questions for Tom? Spencer?
I did read the RFC and I saw asynchronous stuff that I did. But what about conditionals? If I have a condition that the first time the computed property is run, I access a property,
Yep.
but the second time it runs, there's a different property that I'm concerned about.
Right.
Does this handle that?
Yeah, it totally handles it, and here's why. So this is like the gotcha that everyone thinks of when they think about this. But think about a conditional, right? Say if is employed is true, do something else. If is fired, do something else, right? Okay, I don't know why that example came to my mind. In order for that thing's value to change, that conditional must flip, right? So if the branch of that conditional is false, it actually doesn't matter what any of the values inside of there are or whether they change, because, of course, they're not being used in the result of the computation. And the only way that they'll ever be used is if that original thing that you did consume changes, right? Because unless you have like Schrodinger's if, where it evaluates the different branches at any time, it is true that we don't support like conditionals with math.random. I'll give you that. But other than that, all these cases are handled. And actually, you actually bring up a really great point, which is there's a performance benefit here. Because if you think about computed properties, you are expressing all of these dependencies even in that case. So you might have a conditional where you say, use these 5 properties, else use these other 5 properties. You're going to recompute that property even if the things in the conditional that you didn't go down change, because you don't know, right? You have to recompute it. So this is actually much more efficient. It's a more efficient thing. And it's also true of arrays. So if you think of at each, what that's doing is quite computationally expensive. Every time you add or remove something from an array, it has to go through and add or remove observers in that process. With something like this, you don't need to express at each. You can have what would be the equivalent of 2 at eaches in the dependency path, which is very high tech, right? I don't know if anyone's tried to write a dependency with 2 at each. You can't. This just looks at what you consume from those arrays and is able to figure it all out automatically, so you don't ever have to worry about it.
Other questions?
So the thing that always bothers me when I see the abstract operator is if I've got a whole bunch of things that are abstract, if any one of them changes, is it going to run all the things that could use that particular property?
Okay, so the question is, if in attract, if you change a tracked property, will it recompute all of the other computed tracked properties that use it? Yeah, it would need to, right? That's behavior you would want.
Well, the way I understand the computed decorator or computed function goes today, if only when one of its dependencies changes, it only invalidates, and it only
I see.
when you get it.
Okay, so the question is if you have a track property, and if you change a track property, does it invalidate other compute properties that don't use it, right? So like unrelated, like if one track property changes, does it recompute the entire system? And the answer to that is no. So without going too much into the detail, I think this is really one of the key insights and the key architectural principles of the Glimmer virtual machine. And there's documentation about this in the Glimmer VM repo. You can read the guides. It's called references and validators. And the key thing here is that what we call revalidation is extremely cheap. And revalidation is basically just scanning all the values that went into a template and seeing, did anything change, and if so, what changed? And the way that we do that is kind of interesting. And in short, one of the key insights is that modern JavaScript VMs are really highly optimized for things like integers. So if in V8, for example, once it's optimized your code, integers are just native like ints in memory, right? It's like the equivalent of like C code using, and so integer comparison is one or two x86 assembly instructions. So every time you get a value in your template, what we do behind the scenes is assign that thing a number, and then we maintain a global revision counter. And so anytime a track property changes, what will happen is we will go through this list, which is, again, just a list of integers, and we're doing integer comparison. And it's so fast in a modern VM, you can do thousands and thousands of these things, and it's still going to be sub-millisecond. And that allows us to very discreetly find exactly what has changed since then. And that's the long answer to the question, which is no, we don't recompute everything when one track property changes. The only things that would recompute are things that have a direct dependency or are a transitive dependency of it.
Cool. One more? All right, we're good. Thanks
Cool.
for a lot of time.
Thank you.
All right. We are on to the headline talk. Hey, nice new phone you got here.
Yeah, it's not like mine. It's not broken.
So our main talk tonight is from a member of the Ember Learning Core team. He is an engineer over at LinkedIn, and he's going to talk to us tonight about scaling, about working on Ember apps at scale. And so he'll talk to us about what types of scale he means, and looking forward to hearing what he has to say. Please help me welcome Chris Singh.
Cool. Hi, welcome everyone to maintaining an Ember application at scale. I'll start off with a quick introduction. I'm Chris. I'm staff engineer at LinkedIn NYC. Our office is right down at the Empire State Building. I also help out with the learning team for the Ember Times. If you don't know the Ember Times, it's a weekly newsletter of everything that's basically happened around Ember repos. Think of it as like a newspaper. Tells you all relevant RFCs, demos, pull requests, etc. So check it out at Ember.js.com/blog. There should be a new Times, maybe this Friday, sometime then. Aside from that, I also tech edit the LinkedIn engineering blog. We also publish some Ember articles. Tom did one last year for EmberConf, the Glimmer and pre-acting. And finally, for my day job, I do work for LinkedIn for the video on Flagship. Speaking of Flagship, that's what the talk is about today. It's about maintaining an Ember application at scale. Flagship is kind of what you see when you enter LinkedIn.com and after you sign in. So we'll discuss issues and solutions around working a large Ember SPA. So what does it mean to be at scale? Let's get a shared understanding around it. Scale for us would be like over 100 engines, over like 200 add-ons, and over 100 web engineers across like 3 or more time zones, probably more with remote engineers. And then like our user base is like over 500 million members. So as you can see, there could be like every single permutation has been done at this application. Imagine updating all of that code to track properties. It's like a huge like endeavor. So all of these engines, all of these add-ons live to support our flagship application, which does like stuff like feed, profile, jobs, premium, company. There's messaging, notifications, articles, video. The list goes on and on. And this is like just a few examples around it. So now that we have like a shared understanding of kind of like what our problem is, or like what scale is, what's the problem around that? Basically, when code bases are at scale, it's kind of hard to have 100% full understanding of your application architecture. Like someone working on articles would not know anything about what's happening on profile. The profile people might structure their code differently. They might have constants located somewhere versus just embedded in the components. It varies team to team. Sharing knowledge is also hard. People understand or like learn differently. So some people would be happy to read the doc. Some people would rather have in-person training. Some people like would rather just see it in an RB or in a pull request. RB is our internal name for a pull request. So yeah, and you can't really just like stop the world and update everything to track properties. You can't stop 100 engineers. The product itself, the productivity would be like, as you can imagine, there would be at least like, you'd be blocking like 30 pull requests a day, just like locking trunk. So that's the problems to scale, but there's also like problems in general. Not just because your application is not at scale doesn't mean you're not gonna have problems maintaining it. There's prioritization problems. Features usually go higher in the pecking order than maintenance. If you have someone to work on it, they might not know everything there is to know about how to upgrade something. Let's say to track properties. I'm just going to use that example from now on. So tied together, we need to find a way to maintain high quality craftsmanship for the overall application, especially if it's a huge Ember app for this talk. So how do we try to fix it? The goal of fixing it is really to catch issues earlier on rather than later. This is because, as you all know, it's easier to teach someone before they've written the code, written tests, and like basically have it in production, and then have to refactor it, rework it. It's easier if they know it right away. But it's kind of hard to do that. So here are some of the ways we have tried to do it. One of them is communication. So one way to communicate is through text. We have a number of open source documentation, from the guides to the Ember Times, the Discord channel. You can ask the community over there, and of course, like the Ember Discuss website, where you can also ask questions. Then there are, of course, your internal documentations. It's better to align as much as possible to the open source, but as you all know, sometimes your company would have company-specific logic, company-specific kind of like limitations with your API, for example. So you don't want to lose that knowledge each time someone joins your team. So I think it's still useful to have open source or internal documentations, but it's as much as possible we try to align with open source. But internal documentations is useful for when you have disagreements between teams, because we have a saying at LinkedIn that if it's not in the docs, it's not a real thing. This code revolves around like writing down your best practices, reducing tribal knowledge, and facilitate like facts over opinions. And this is like really what Ember is about, right? It's to have a very opinionated framework, so you don't have bike shedding across your Slack channels and not getting work done. So the other part of communication is through in-person. Mentoring or meetings, meetups like this. Meetings are generally good for alignment, but I prefer not to discuss anything really on meetings. It's better to just break out into groups and then tackle those problems afterwards. And mentoring this can be like group mentorings from like training sessions to even like one-on-one sessions. Unfortunately, everyone I think would agree, we lean more towards meetings rather than mentoring because it's easier to do so. Next, we have rules. So I know you're already thinking, Ember, it's already an opinionated framework. Chris, we don't need any more rules. But I think you forget what every developer is like. And they're like, don't tell me how to do this. I want to do it my own way. Yeah. So we have rules. Here are like a couple rules that we facilitate, or we kind of enforce, I guess. I don't like that word, but we do enforce it. It's more like to facilitate code consistency over like, I don't know, someone's personal vendetta. So like, for example, we use BEM for CSS. A style sheet per component makes it easier to scope your CSS within that component rather than having like one huge CSS file and then trying to overwrite each other. It also makes code easier to refactor. If everything is kind of like uniform or at least semi-uniform, it's easier to apply a code mod or amend a code mod and then make it apply for your use case. Finally, we do have a rule on rules because even the rule people are like, don't tell me how to do this. I want to make my own rules. I know what's better for the application. So modifying rules should only really be done to deprecate old API, but creating new rules is only done to deprecate old API, but modifying one are only there if like best practices have shifted. So try to like not modify your rules too much because people get angry when they've just refactored everything to one kind of like one pattern and then now they need to do it again, do a different one. So let's talk about code review. At LinkedIn, we have two different types of code review. There's like a feature business logic review, and then there's like a platform compatibility review. One of them, the one on the left, is to kind of like check if you're doing the feature that you proposed. So say like a video should play after 3 seconds. It should play after 3 seconds, and these people have context in that. And the next one is your platform compatibility review. This is more of like to catch common pitfalls and like best practices. Say like not doing data down actions up. Maybe you've gone rogue and put everything in a window. These people would check that. And like to kind of translate it in the open source world, the feature and business logic reviews are kind of like reviewers with context, and then the platform compatibility review are open source commit rights. Makes sense, right? So code reviews really shouldn't be like someone slacking someone else and being like, please review it, please give me a shot right now, I need to submit it before I go home. Code reviews should like improve and grow everyone, all engineers. So if you're doing code review, we suggest giving clear examples, following some sort of code of conduct. Like, don't be an asshole. Don't just be like, oh, this is so stupid. But also be available. You're not providing any value to someone for highlighting a lot of issues in their code, but then never coming back to give the final ship it. But don't do the work for them. Teach people rather than giving them a patch to just apply and then move on. And always document their opinions, because if it's not in the docs, it's not a real thing. Finally, we have testing. So you've got your code reviewed, or hopefully you've tested it before you've got your code reviewed, but how do you test it? So we have in my opinion, there's two stages where code lives. There's a pre-commit and a post-commit. Or really, post-commit is really broad, right? Because everything that's committed should be deployable. So if you're blocking master because your master is broken, you're really blocking 100 engineers from getting work done. But how do we deal with stuff if things break? On call is basically the answer for it. Being on call is like paying a tax to keep the system healthy. Everyone has to do it at LinkedIn. We have a rotation with training for on call. I think we've written some articles around it, so it's basically a way to deal with the operation side of things. One thing that on-call provides us is releases. So our on-call engineers make sure that we release at least 3 times a day, with every code getting to prod within 3 hours from code commit to prod. This allows people really to chill out and not be so worried about getting their code in, and trying to put in as much craftsmanship in their PRs as possible, rather than trying to submit something really quickly so it can go live and then they can get some numbers on it, and then they'll be like, oh, we'll write the test later, or we'll fix this code later, which really never happens, right? So we've published quite a few articles on this. You can just Google LinkedIn 3x3. You'll probably find details on it. I think the article was a mobile use case, but it still holds true. So going back to pre-commit and post-commit. We test our code before and after. What do I mean by that? After, we always A/B test our code in production. This provides us with kind of a safeguard. In case your code is bad and is causing issues, we can just turn off your A/B tests, and the world can still keep going without having to roll back everything. But we always have the confidence to roll back or fix forward, depending on kind of the severity of the issue. But then before code gets into production, we require everything to have a test along with any new component, new features in that component, as part of every pull request. Yeah. So thinking about tests, testing is done to ensure our code runs as expected. So we try to mimic real life as much as possible. So I think one of our problems and one of the things we're trying to work on is trying not to overstub our methods, making sure our components are not basically living in a fake stub world, rather than in the real world where this kind of data or these functions would not be run. So if you're stubbing out some private functions that doesn't actually handle the data well, you're not actually testing out your component. You're testing out your stubs. But also, it's important to keep in mind to use the right tests. So what I mean by that is, if you're trying to test out a util, make sure it's a unit test. You don't load up the entire application just to test out a util. At our scale, this like abusing application tests will kind of like really slow down everyone else, just because there's 200 add-ons. Just imagine how many test files there are, and it's running through all of that for every commit everyone makes. And just in engineering hours, that's expensive. And it's easy to like fall in a trap where you abstract everything away just to get a test running. But yeah, I think you should abstract your components instead and then test out smaller pieces as unit tests or container tests. Yeah, top of the funnel more than bottom of the funnel. And finally, when we write tests, it's another thing that we need to work on, but it's better to write tests that are easy to follow rather than easy to write. So ideally, your tests would not be changed or really like copy pasted. But it will be read like a lot of times. So think more in a write once and read many kind of like philosophy for your tests. Part of the problem here is if you abstract your tests too much, not only will it be hard to code mod it, it will also be hard for other people to understand what you're doing, so they'll just copy paste everything else, and then they're like over stubbing their test now because you stubbed something in your side, and it just spirals down from there. So lastly, we have refactoring and tooling. So if you've ever refactored someone else's code, it kind of feels like this. You're just trying to like make sense of things without destroying any of the light bulbs, but trying to untangle this mess. First, let's tackle this issue by using conventions. We use engines to isolate code from each other. That's what engines are for. That's why we use them. We use the add-ons to share code between engines. We try to break down massive components into smaller chunks. Admittedly, that might not happen all the time, but always try to refactor your code into that. And make your data flow predictable. Data down, actions up, and using Ember data really makes that easy for us. So that's where kind of like the platform review comes into play, is trying to enforce that rather than letting people just do whatever they want. Like maybe using jQuery to fetch data instead of using Ember data. Finally, don't do it by hand. It's impossible to do brute force this by hand, even through reviews. So we use like linters. We have our own custom lints for specific like LinkedIn libraries. So if we're trying to deprecate a certain method in the library, we'll lint that away little by little until everyone has migrated, and then totally disable it. Automate as much as possible. So we use prettier for code style. There's no reason for us to be like bike shedding in a pull request. So if we have prettier, there is no discussion. The computer does everything. Yeah. Then you just have a discussion on the prettier rules, but it's a smaller discussion. And also file structure. This makes it easier, again, for code mods to run because it's very deterministic of where each of our add-ons are. If you're coming into a new project, you know exactly kind of like where the routes are, where components are, where the controllers are. And Ember gives this to us very easily. I've worked with other like JavaScript frameworks, and it's always a mess when you're joining a new project, where you're like, why is the components separated to pages, to components, and like something else, controllers, all in the root folder of your project. It makes it hard for new developers to join. Yeah, So using BEM, we can find and replace all of our CSS as well, because we also do not allow people to really like concatenate style names. So you can't just have like, I don't know, like video __ and then like a constant or like a JavaScript constant that is dynamic. We usually try to avoid that because then it's harder for someone else to refactor your code by using like find and replace. So some refactoring tips. I keep saying code mods, but we do abuse it, so use it as much as possible. There is no way for us to kind of like do everything by hand, but we do end up having to do quite a bit by hand because being at our scale, you would hit every single kind of like dead spot that the code mod left. It's just the sheer number of permutations of developers. They're going to find a way to kind of like do something that you would never expect to do, like running tests or like stubbing. We've recently like stumbled into like people stubbing out globals in our tests. It's like very terrible, but that's kind of like what you have to do, right? And yeah, use linters to help you. There's the Ember best practices lint, ESLint plugin. We, I believe, use most, if not all of it, in our application. Just because something works doesn't mean it's kind of like correct or in line with the framework's like programming models. So it's better to get it like right before someone puts it up in a review. So give them guidance beforehand. So how do we see if we're doing better? So at a scale, it's also, you can't just like go up to every person and ask them like, how's it going? You can do it maybe like within your own small office, but even here, it's like in New York, I can't go to California and like ask every single person there. So we use like surveys and kind of like monitor how many Jira tickets are opened. There's also like development metadata, such as like build failures, test failures, how fast code is getting from like being up in a review to committed into master. Yeah. So most important of all, we're doing better if people are engaged and not kind of like giving up ownership to a Purple Robes Club. If people are not engaged with like the design and the app ownership process, then all of these rules are not really working for you, because once you quit, this all just like tumbles down. I guess you won't really care, but so all of these rules are there just to make sure that developers have more focus rather than bike shedding. So if they don't have focus, then it doesn't really, like, there's no point. If you're arguing over rules, there's no real point. You're just moved up where people bike shed from the code to the rules. So what have we learned so far? I stole this slide from April Wenzel, maybe? I don't know. From the Node.js conference this year. But what we really learned is to maintain craftsmanship, we need to be humble, inclusive, cooperative, always learning, and a mentor to others. If you can't scale this out by yourself, you can't do everything by yourself, so you really need to scale it out. Get more people involved into making sure the application is healthy. Code mod is our friend, but at our scale, you're going to hit every edge case. It's kind of like the fact of life, so you still need a team of people working on it. We also need to give developers a way to go outside the happy path. So again, at our scale, you're not going to cover every single use case for a shared component. So your shared components should really have an escape hatch for people to either add more stuff into it or work around it, rather than like building their own like modal or I don't know. Tribal knowledge really wreaks havoc on your developers. No one wants to be the new person and then like learn all these weird DSL. So people don't really have to go through that pain anymore. So here's where docs come into play. If it's not in the docs, it's not a real thing. So new developers can just read the docs and kind of find out the lay of the land from there, or at least like close enough. And to do large-scale migrations, we've found that you A/B test your changes to a pilot area and kind of like see how that's going before you apply it everywhere else. Just because you might have holes in your plans, and like once you've started the ball rolling, it's kind of like harder to stop it once everyone's migrating their code into that new pattern, and you haven't like fixed every issue, every edge case. And not being disruptive is ideal, but it's good to have some friction if later on we have like less massive refactors, massive code changes later down the path. So it's a trade-off really of like having rules and rewriting your app every 2 years. So I would rather have rules than rewrite the app every 2 years. And that's about it. Thank you so much, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Questions for Chris?
So how does LinkedIn do dependency management scale? I find it a hard problem on a small piece of code. How do you handle, one engine requiring one version of a dependency and a different engine wanting a different version of that dependency, the two not working no matter what you do?
Essentially, if you're updating a dependency, then you have to fix it for everyone else. You can't just like update the dependency for your engine and not like do it for everyone else, I guess. Yeah.
So, follow-on question to that: does that imply that all of those, all that code that you're referring to is in one repository at LinkedIn?
Yeah.
With one test suite that passes. Did you have a question?
Yeah. What are like some of the interesting code mods you've been running? Like, what are the kind of things you're using it for? What are some examples that you like?
I'm on the spot. One thing we've run recently is kind of like moving from Ember DOM helpers to like Ember tests helpers, the native one.
And Berserk, you guys know Berserk, he wrote the properties of RxD on Reddit. He has for GCN. GCN is a nice word for saying he brought the site down because of the native classes, like the native JavaScript classes. He applied the code mod, and then it turns out they had an oopsie, and it wasn't transpiling properly in Babel for Android phones, and we had to roll back. So it was just good, with Phil's character.
Nice.
I actually have a question similar to the dependency one, but I'll preface by saying not the dependency issue.
Okay.
How do you guys manage with so many developers and so many different combinations? How do you guys manage your environments? Like, how do you, like, for something, example that we run into, we were on a new developer, he pulls out the code, it was great for everybody else. He goes, oh, it doesn't build for me. How are you guys handling just the general environment sharing issues there? I don't even need the dependency that changed something that's worked for me. Just the very basic, that baseline shared environment, just to make sure that I can pull down the code and it will work.
Well, like lucky enough for us, we have like an army of IT people to kind of preload our software.
So I don't.
But we also kind of like package some build scripts in our repos, and then that kind of gets run when you start it up. Yeah, go ahead.
So, you talked about all these changes. One of the things that's been frustrating me over the past year is that the testing story for engines has never settled out, especially with modular everyone's like, it'll be fixed with modular unification, except that never landed for a whole year or so. And we're wondering how you've been managing without having testing story in a stable place for LinkedIn. Where do you put your tests? Do you put them in the engines or in the main repo? How do you make sure if they're in the repo, in the engines, how do you make sure they all run, et cetera, et cetera?
I guess I'm not sure if I'm the person to answer this question, but our tests are located within like the add-ons as well as inside the engines. I think they all get run when we commit something, like goes through all of them. So might not be the most efficient thing, but I'm not sure.
I think the answer is we have Robert Jackson on our team.
Okay.
Question for Bryon?
So with like so many engines, so many developers, how does your team or how do the individual teams, how do they share their work?
Say that.
How do the teams share their work?
Share your work.
Yeah.
There's really there's the overall kind of like application meetups that people share, kind of like what they've done, what have worked with them. But there's also like smaller ones. Say like everyone that works in feed would have that kind of like a meetup for those subset of people. Yeah, but it is a problem. Like if I, as a developer on video, like I wouldn't know the ins and outs of what it is to like apply to a job or like the jobs people. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just a follow-up on that for clarity. So you guys, I guess my own clarity, you don't have like an internal unified API like you guys are all like inclined to. That sounds like more like every unit is kind of on their own. You guys get together and decide how to be interoperable.
There's also like a single API unit behind. I'm not sure how they're structured, but yeah.
I was confused by the idea of having overarching rules and then having people get together for like a swap of how we're going to do this together seems kind of defeating the purpose of the rule. But that was the only reason I was asking.
Okay.
Is there like an internal like unifying rule of how you guys communication?
There are there's internal like teams working on kind of like a unified way of doing it, but because features are like.
If I work on content, you work on video, the only way we know how to interoperate is we get together and we say this is how we do X and we say this is how we do Y.
But we also like review each other's code, so that's the point of the platform review is like.
Yeah, that's good and great. Everyone reviews each other's code. I guess I'm saying even at the organization of your scale,
Yeah.
you don't have rules about interoperation between groups. You're still relying on individual groups to come together to communicate with each other, how they interoperate, or there's an overarching rule about if you are a unit within this organization, this is how we interoperate.
We also have a team to manage kind of like the overall app, but they don't obviously manage upgrading every single thing or like migrating all the code paths. They're more there to like make sure everyone follows the same like application structure. Yeah.
So I feel like I'm projecting a little bit when I ask this question, but I was wondering on LinkedIn, whenever you worked on some like large components and you don't want to adhere to the data down actions up process, how have y'all gone to tackle components like that? I know that's like a pretty specific example, but let's just say you have like a giant parent component and you're continuously passing down data and you're just kind of starting to notice you're losing track of where data's coming from. Have you had any examples y'all have encountered where you kind of wanted to change up how
Like not do a data down section?
Like for example, yeah, like maybe you want to use this service instead.
I don't have an example on the top of my head, sorry.
Okay.
But
I was just wondering.
yeah.
That could be a good topic for the bar in a few minutes.
In the Embers, in the open source community, the RFC process has been wildly successful. Do you do anything similar at LinkedIn?
We also have RFCs, yes.
quick question. You mentioned one of the rules that you enforce is public versus private methods.
Yes.
Do you use leading underscores, or how do you designate these?
This has like more been a team by team kind of rule, I guess. In our team, we do underscore for private, and usually you should not mark out your private methods or stub out. Yeah.
I saw somebody else's hand up somewhere. I didn't see it. All right, cool. Let's have another round of applause for Chris.